to our 5th webinar on senior eligibility. My name is Edith, and I work at the California Association today, and I'm super excited to have Inicio with us today as well, and hosting Liliana Sandoval from San Francisco Marin Food Bank. For logistics, we'll be using the questions panel on your right. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in, and we'll answer questions at the end. We're also going to be asking you questions during the presentation, so we'll have a couple of multiple choice questions throughout the presentation. Please feel free to answer using that question panel on the right. So we'll ask you to enter A, B, or C. And lastly, the webinars are being recorded and posted. This is one of many webinars in our CalFresh eligibility series. The first 4 looked at CalFresh and the application process. And this is the first one that begins to dive into more specific target populations. So today we've invited Liliana to talk to us about the eligibility rules as they pertain to seniors and people with disabilities. And they're all being recorded and posted, and you'll find the website underneath the CalFresh logo to the right. Great. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over and introduce you to Liliana. As I said, she's the CalFresh Program Senior Manager at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. So welcome, Liliana.
Great. Thank you for having me. And welcome all to the call. Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone is doing their best to stay healthy in these wild times. It still remains important for us to try and learn so that we can continue to serve the community as they're going to need us more than ever. So next slide, please. So we'll go over the agenda for today really quickly. We'll talk about the definitions for elderly persons and persons with disability in CalFresh, how income works for this population, what CalFresh rules are for residents of institutions, other specific rules for households with elderly and or disabled members, messaging and myths that are prevalent in this community. We'll review really quickly, and again, we're going to have some time towards the end for you to ask all your questions and for us to try and answer them. Please don't wait until the end to ask your questions. You can submit anytime in the chat box, as Edith mentioned, and we're going to try and get to everything as much as we can. All right, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing to know about elderly and disabled households is that there are many special rules for them. So in terms of who qualifies for these rules, someone who is elderly under the CalFresh guidelines is defined as someone who is over 60 or older, and a person with disabilities is defined as someone who is getting a disability benefit such as SSI, or the Supplemental Security Income benefit, railroad disability benefits, and or other benefits related to Medi-Cal and Medi-Cal, and there's many others. These households do not have a gross income limit, so again, they don't have to meet that first gross test. If their monthly gross income is above 200% of the federal poverty level, they still have to meet the net income guidelines. And this is another group who, this is a group who has a resource test if they are over 200% of the federal poverty level. So, for example, they cannot exceed 100% FPL, and their resources cannot be greater than $3,500, and that includes cash or money in the bank or one-time payments, stocks and bonds, etc. Households that are 1 or 2 people maximum can get the minimum, which is currently $16, as long as their income is below 200% of the federal poverty level. And this is true even if their monthly net income is higher than the limit at the time. Next slide, please. So again, if a household's gross income is above 200% of the federal poverty level, they have to meet the net income and resource test to get CalFresh. They can't go over 100% of the federal poverty level. And again, they can't have more than $3,500 in resources. And next slide, please. If they are below 200% of the federal poverty level, again, for a 1 or 2-person household, they can get at least the minimum, even if they are above the net income. Next slide, please. Okay. So our first audience poll, hope to get a lot of participation in this. The question is, if a household that includes someone who receives SSI applies, can they get CalFresh if their monthly gross income is over 200% of the federal poverty level? Your choices are A, no, people who receive SSI can't get CalFresh. I hope everyone knows the answer to that one. B, no, they must meet the gross income limit of 200% FPL. C, yes, but they must still meet the net income limit of 100% FPL. Or D, yes, and they can get the minimum of $16 if they are a household of 1 or 2. Please put your answers in the chat box. We'll give you 20 seconds to answer. So again, if a household that includes someone who receives SSI applies, can they get CalFresh if their monthly gross income is over 200% FPL? Do we have any answers coming in, Edith or Stephanie?
Yes. We've gotten a couple of answers. It looks like people are torn between C and D. So everyone believes that yes, they can get CalFresh, but we're not sure if they still have to meet the net income limit or if they can get the minimum if they're a household of 1 or 2.
Okay, so let's go through each of these potential answers together. So the first one, A, no, people who receive SSI can't get CalFresh. That is false. We all know that as of last summer, as of June 1st, 2019, people on SSI are now eligible to receive CalFresh. B, no, they must meet the gross income limit of 200% FPL. That is also false because someone on SSI, Supplemental Security Income, they could potentially have a disability and have a gross income over the limit. C, the C, yes, but they must still meet the net income limit of 100% FPL. This is correct because since the income is over 200% FPL, they will meet the net income test and resources. They still have to meet the net and resources test to qualify. And D, yes, and they can get the minimum of $16 if they're a household of 1 or 2. This one's false. If households of 1 or 2 can get the minimum, but only if their gross income is below 200%. And look at the question closely. It says that they are over 200%. So little trick wording on that one. So the answer was C, yes, but they must still meet the net income limit of 100% FPL. Great job for everyone for attempting to answer. Next slide, please. So we'll go over the rules for residents of institutions now. Next slide. So generally, a resident of an institution is someone who gets 2 of their 3 daily meals at the institution as a part of the normal operations. And generally, folks who are residing in institutions are not eligible for CalFresh, but there are some delineators between what is an institution and what is not an institution. So some groups are not considered residents of an institution and are eligible for CalFresh, and these are folks who have to be treated as a separate household from other people that they're living with, and that includes folks who are in federally subsidized housing for seniors, if they are residing in a drug addiction and alcohol treatment center that requires regular participation or rehabilitation and treatment. If they are in group living arrangements for people who are blind or have a disability. If they are in public or private nonprofit shelters for battered persons, just adults and their children, or if they are in public or private nonprofit shelters for people who are experiencing homelessness. So the definition is very general, but again, there's some details around what is not considered an institution. Next slide, please. So again, this is the list generally of what is not considered an institution, and you'd want to look that over more thoroughly. Next slide, please. So in terms of drug addiction and alcohol treatment centers, these centers have to be operating under Part B of Title 19 of the Public Health Service Act. And there's different certifications around that, or they must be authorized by the Food and Nutrition Services as a retailer. The treatment center also cannot require residents to apply for CalFresh. If someone voluntarily does apply for CalFresh and they are residing at a drug addiction and alcohol treatment center, they have to do so through an authorized representative that is designated by the treatment center. And I believe we have or will go over the authorized rep rules in another webinar. Next slide, please. Okay. So what about group living arrangements? A group living arrangement, it can be private or public. And it's a residential home for disabled or blind individuals that serves no more than 16 residents and also has to be certified by the California Department of Social Services. So individuals that are living in private for-profit group living arrangements are ineligible for CalFresh. So that's the distinction between the private nonprofit and for-profit. So if it's at a for-profit, again, they're just categorically ineligible for CalFresh. Persons who are disabled or blind residents of group living arrangements can apply on their own or through an authorized representative, so they have more options. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so another audience poll, again, please answer in the chat box. Pete is 70 years old. He lives at a homeless shelter and gets disability benefits. Is he considered a resident of an institution? And your only options are yes or no. So again, just think back to a few slides ago, is a homeless shelter considered an institution? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. What's the word, Stephanie and Edith?
It looks like most people are saying.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Edith. It looks like most people are saying no.
No, that is correct. As you remember back from a few slides, homeless shelters are not considered institutions, and 70-year-old Pete should definitely apply for CalFresh on his own or separately, and he can apply separately from other people living in the shelter. Just some tips to at least what goes on in our county. It is a little bit difficult sometimes to understand which of these locations are or are not institutions, and our county here in San Francisco actually has a list of specific addresses of what is considered an institution or not. So it might be something really helpful to ask your county for, so that you know, you can have that list with you, and if you're going out and doing your outreach, you can easily, you know, recognize that address as someone who isn't an institution, and then, you know, you can go back to the rules about whether or not they can apply on their own. Okay, next slide, please. All right, Some other rules for households with elderly and or disabled members. Next slide. So in terms of household composition, if someone is 60 or older and also has a disability, the keyword "and" being there, they must be able to be their own CalFresh household, even if they purchase and prepare with other household members. So there's some rules around this. So again, if someone is 60 plus and has a disability, they could still be their own CalFresh household, even if they're purchasing and preparing with other people in the household. So in order to get their own CalFresh benefits, the individual would have to provide information that shows that the other household members' income combined is 165% or less of the federal poverty level. This income is not is not counted or added towards the individual's income. It's just to prove that they can still be part of their own household. All right. And keep in mind that other household combinations still do apply. Next slide, please. Okay. So some really important information about deductions for this population. Someone who has a disability or is 60 or older can get the excess shelter deduction, can get medical expenses deducted, and they can also get dependent care deductions. So these deductions can help a household who has a person with disabilities in it or a person who is 60 or older be eligible for CalFresh and or get more benefit. Okay, next slide, please. So the excess shelter deduction, they don't have a shelter deduction cap. So we know generally folks don't get dollar for dollar deduction of what they're paying for rent or housing, but this population doesn't have that cap. So if they're paying, you know, $1,000 or $400 or $700, they would get the full deduction. Next slide, please. So medical expense deduction. This one's really important along with the household deduction for this population. So if someone is 60 plus or has a disability, you do want to ask about any out-of-pocket medical expenses. And basically, if someone has between $35.01 and $155 a month in medical expenses that they're paying out of pocket, then they'll automatically get a $120 reduction. You don't need to necessarily ask for more than $35.01 unless you think it's going to be greater than that $155, because if it is greater than $155, then they will be able to get their actual deductions, all of them deducted. So if someone, you know, has receipts for $40 and it doesn't seem like through your conversation they have much more regularly, then, you know, that's all they need to have. But if it sounds like they're paying a lot out of pocket and it's going to be close to 155 or definitely over 155, then you want them, you want to guide them to try and get those receipts, because then they will be able to expense all of that. And these can include, but they're not limited to, co-pays, so going to visit the doctor or the dentist, transportation costs to and from pharmacies or medical providers, any expenses related to service animals, over-the-counter medications, anything that they pay out of pocket for their vision, dental, and general medical care, eyeglasses, dentures, prosthetics, hearing aids, incontinence supplies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important when you are out in the community or screening over the phone or however you do it, to really ask this question right away about medical expenses. And if you're having person-to-person contact with someone, just try and look for those visual cues. Are they wearing glasses? Do they use a cane? Are they in a mobility support device? Do they have a service animal with them? So make sure that you're kind of doing some visual screening, and that kind of triggers you to ask about these questions, because sometimes folks forget. They They have a lot of paperwork with them, and you know, they're not always thinking about medical expenses right top of mind. All right. Next slide, please. So another important one for this population is the dependent care deduction, and this is for households who pay for dependent care. They can actually deduct the full amount that they pay, and this includes for child or adult dependent care. You want to encourage your applicants to proactively tell the county that they have these expenses, just again to help them maximize their CalFresh benefits. What we have seen in our work, especially post CalFresh expansion, is that you know, the household, the shelter deduction and the medical expense deduction have been crucial in getting people over that minimum benefit amount. So we make sure that we're asking thoroughly about medical expenses and what they're paying for their housing costs. And again, if they have to pay anything for dependent care. Next slide, please. So some other rules for this population, they do have an extended certification period. So this is the SAR reports and the RRR that are due. So for any households that have members 60 plus, or they have a disability and they have earned income, so they have maybe a part-time job or anything else, any income that is earned outside of their Social Security or SSI, their certification period is 24 months or 2 years. And the interview is required at the 24-month period, and they will have a SAR due at the 6-month mark, a 12-month mark, the 18-month mark. All right, so for that, if you can kind of visualize a timeline with me, the person would apply, 6 months later, they have a SAR 7 due, another 6 months after that, or at the year from applying, they have a SAR 7 due, another 6 months after that, or at the 1.5-year mark, they have a SAR 7 due, and then another 6 months after that, or at the 2-year mark from applying, they have their RRR, and they have to complete an interview. If they are 60 plus and or have a disability and have earned income. Okay, but what about for folks who are 60 plus or have a disability and have no earned income? So these are our Social Security only or SSI only folks, right? So they have a 36-month certification period or 3 years. They don't have an interview that is waived at the certification period, and they submit SARs every year after the initial application. So they apply, 12 months later is a SAR 7 due, 12 months after that at the 2-year mark is a SAR 7 due, and at the 3-year mark they have their recertification or RRR due, but an interview is not required. So again, it would just, for any of those, it would just be filling out the form and submitting information regarding changes to household composition or income. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so third audience poll. Again, get ready with your trigger fingers for the chat box. Marcia is 63 years old and her only income is from Social Security retirement. How long will her certification be? A, 12 months, B, 24 months, C, 36 months, or D, 48 months. So again, Marcia is 63 and her only income is from Social Security retirement. How long is her certification period? Edith, whenever you're ready, let us know what the resounding answer is like.
Yeah, it looks like we've gotten quite a few answers, and people are kind of all saying C, 36 months.
Great, yay, everybody was listening. Yeah, so it's C, 36 months, and the reason is because Marcia is at 63 years old, meets the guidelines for someone who is a senior under CalFresh rules, and because she's only receiving Social Security retirement, which we all know is unearned income. So that means that because of these two things, her certification period is 36 months or 3 years. Great job, everyone. All right, next slide, please. All right, so how do we address common myths and concerns about CalFresh within this community? You know, I'm sure everyone has heard a lot of things, and we're going to go over what some of those are. Next slide, please. A predominant one, it's not worth it. I'll only get $16 a month. So if you have, just a little tip here, if you have anything else that you do or say with each of these myths that you might hear out in the community, please type them in the chat box. We'll try and read some of them if they're different from what the responses that we have here. So what do you say if it's not worth it? I'll only get $16 a month. Some good responses to that is, you know, that we've heard that are successful. Think of it like a $16 coupon or a gift card that you get every month. No one's going to turn away a $16 gift card. $16 can buy actually quite a bit. We know that there are a lot of outreach programs that have done the work of creating a visual, like creating a picture of what they could buy with $16 at specific stores like Safeway or a local Foods Co. or like a farmer's market, so folks know how far it actually does go and the different food they can get that maybe is not available at a food pantry or food distribution that the client attends. And also a big one that we're using a lot here in San Francisco, getting CalFresh can help you get other discounts. And it does depend on your county, but for example, their Farmers Market Match, Amazon Prime offers a discounted, they offer their services discounted for people who are receiving CalFresh. You can get utility and phone assistance, public transportation discounts. I know here in San Francisco, there's like free days for museums. I think there's other just free, there's like, for someone who does own property that they're living in, they can get garbage discounts, internet discounts, a lot of things like that. So you do want to look that up if you have the opportunity, or oftentimes the county administration has already put something like that together. So it is a good idea to just reach out to whoever you can to ask for that, because there are a lot of free things and discounts that someone who has CalFresh has the opportunity to get once they're enrolled. Okay, next slide, please. If I get CalFresh, someone who needs it more won't be able to get benefits. That is not true. CalFresh, as we know, is available to everyone who qualifies. So definitely just categorically not true. I think we also like to talk about the economic impact of the program. I think the research has come out to change what the actual multiplier is, but historically it's for every dollar that's spent on CalFresh, $1.79 goes back into the local economy, and that's, you know, due to job creation and being able to, you know, just what the purchasing power that you have with CalFresh actually is. So that's important to, you know, to talk about with this community. These are, you know, generally folks who are really proud of the work that they've done, you know, and given to society, and they're a little older now, and then maybe they feel stigmatized or just, you know, don't have a hard time asking for help, and so they don't want to, quote unquote, take it away from someone else. So it is important to relay that it is available for anyone who qualifies and everyone who qualifies, but also that by using this benefit, it is actually has a great positive impact on the local economy and the community where that person lives. So really, really great to talk about that. Next slide, please. So here's a myth. My SSI benefits will decrease if I get CalFresh. We know that that's not true. The state of California did a lot of work to mitigate this issue. That was something that you know, people were really afraid of for a long time. But getting CalFresh does not impact someone who is receiving SSI benefits if they apply and get CalFresh. Next slide, please. What if someone says CalFresh is only for families with children? Well, we know that's not right because we're having a whole webinar on rules specifically for persons who are 60 plus or who have a disability. And you know, we know that it can be for students, it can be for single adults, it can be for anybody. Again, it's available for anyone and everyone who qualifies, including all the folks that I just listed, and then some. So just please make sure to continue to relay that message out in the community that this is for everyone who qualifies. Next slide, please. What if I own a car and my home, so I can't qualify for CalFresh? I remember many years ago when I was still doing daily outreach, I heard this actually a lot. And I've always wondered where it came from. The fact of the matter is that it's not true. You can own a car, you can own a home that you live in and still be eligible for CalFresh. There are, you know, specific rules around owning multiple homes and the income around that, but that's not necessarily something that we see a lot in this program. But please feel free to reference the CalFresh guide online. If you do encounter that, there's a lot of good information there about these specific sorts of situations. But yes, you can own a car and you can own the home that you live in and still be eligible for CalFresh. Again, it's for anybody who qualifies. Next slide, please. All right, before we go into the review, Edith, did you see any new responses to any of those myths or fears that we were addressing? Anything stand out in the chat box?
It came in.
All right. These are all great. So now we'll go into the review. Again, just really quickly, what we learned. Next slide. So this is a long list of things, some definitions. Again, elderly for this program means someone who is 60 or older. The program defines a disability or a person with a disability as someone who is getting one of the lists of disability benefits from government disability benefits. These households do not have a gross income limit if there is at least one member who has a disability or is 60 or older. Remember that residents of an institution are persons who get at least 2 or 3 of their daily meals at the institution as a part of normal operations of this institution. And in general, residents of institutions are not eligible for CalFresh. And then we'll go into what is not an institution. So people living in federal housing, nonprofit shelters for battered or homeless people can apply for CalFresh. People living in drug and alcohol treatment centers can apply, but it has to be through an authorized representative. And for people who are 60 plus and or have a disability, they can get their own CalFresh case even if you know, they are purchasing and preparing food with other people, which is our cardinal rule. A household is purchasing and preparing, but this is for this special population. If they are purchasing and preparing and are 60 plus and disabled, they can still get their own CalFresh benefits if the rest of the household income is 165% FPL, federal poverty level, or less. Again, remember that there are special deductions that are available for this population. So we want to keep in mind the excess shelter deduction, so always asking for rent or what they pay for housing, if anything. Medical expenses, anything over $35 and a penny is going to get them, trigger that $120 reduction. If it's over $155, they get to count that dollar for dollar. And or dependent care, so dependent care being adult daycare or child daycare for a person with disabilities or over 60, that is counted dollar for dollar. So these are 3 big things that you want to remember when providing application assistance for this population. And the last thing, elderly and disabled households can also have longer certification periods. So remember that if they're elderly and or disabled, and they have earned income, their certification period is 2 years with some SARs in between. And if they are elderly and or disabled with only unearned income, then their certification period is 3 years. There is no interview at the recertification period, and they have STARS every year. All right, next slide. So now is your time to answer or to ask us any questions and to share anything else that you might want to share that works with this population. So please go ahead and take your time and type that into the chat box. We're going to try and get to everything that you asked.
So while people are typing in their questions, we did receive 2 questions already. The first one is, can a applying for CalFresh get a medical deduction if they pay for health insurance? So let's say that maybe it's someone who's applying who's in their 40s. I see. So actually they're saying someone who's applying in their 40s with no disability, would they get a deduction for paying for health insurance?
So these rules, again, are only for people who are 60 plus and or have a disability. So right now, those are the only 2 populations that can get their medical deductions counted. So the special thing about what's going on now is that previously medical deductions for these 2 populations, for anybody 60 or older and or who had a disability, they had to meet a threshold, so they would count anything that was $35 or over. But if it was like $34 or $2, that wouldn't get counted. They had to meet that minimum threshold to get any sort of deduction, and I believe it was dollar for dollar. But now we have the standard medical deduction for this population, and so again, what that means is that if you're 60 plus and or have a disability, if you get at least $35.01 a month in medical expenses, so like, you have to get eyeglasses or your over-the-counter prescriptions, things like that, office visits to the dentist, the doctor, your transportation, all that stuff, if it's $35.01 a month or more, and up to $155, you automatically get a $120 deduction. So it is alleviating a lot of the work of collecting, mountains of receipts that folks used to have previously. So unfortunately, someone who is 40 and doesn't have a federally qualified disability, they cannot count any medical expenses until they are 60.
And Liliana, related to your response, someone is asking, when you say dollar for dollar, does that mean that if someone pays $250 in medical expenses, will $250 be the amount deducted?
So let me clarify, that was, I think I was referencing the previous rule for medical deductions for this population. Basically what you would do was, like, let's say in this example, someone had $250 that they paid, $35 would get subtracted, and then the rest, so $215 would get counted as the medical expense deduction. And you would do the CalFresh calculation, and up to the cap of the benefit allotment, that's what they would get. For this standard medical deduction, anything over $155 does get counted dollar for dollar. So yes, if they're paying $250, they're gonna get $250 of their medical expenses deducted. You will have to provide receipts, and I was looking through the all county letters to see. I know our county asked for these expenses to be ongoing. I don't know if anyone else has heard the same, or Steph or Edith, if you can speak to that, if they have to be ongoing, or if it's as long as they have receipts this one time in their certification period, then they get that deduction.
So I think that one-time expenses, like maybe eyeglasses or something like that, can be the amount spent can either be one-time deduction, or it could also be, I believe, divided by the certification period to take kind of like what the quote-unquote monthly amount would be. But I do think it has to be already paid out. I don't think it's like I'm going to, like it can't be not already paid out, or like not, like it can't be prospective. Stephanie, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think you guys covered it. Okay. Thank you, though.
Great. Thank you. What else?
Speaking of medical deductions, we also got another question about if feminine hygiene supplies are considered medical expenses.
That's a good question. If I can just get on my soapbox, I think they should be, because, you know, half the population at a certain point in time needs it. So I don't know. I don't think I've ever thought about that, and that's my bad for not thinking about that. Any response to that, Steph or Edith?
I am not sure either, actually.
I'm not either, but I think that's a good advocacy point.
Yeah, I think if we could all put on our best Jessica Bartholow hats, I think we could, you know, say, why not try it? And there's always, you know, we could always just try and advocate for it, because it is something that, you know, is necessary and is quite expensive, and is not subsidized in other ways. So, good point. Thank you for sharing that.
We do know that incontinence supplies would be considered a medical deduction expense or county. So yeah, try for sure.
Great. What else? What other little gems are folks sharing?
Yeah, so someone was asking about the adult diapers, if that can be a deduction.
Yes, definitely those are, and we've heard, you know, just from colleagues and then from my own team that, you know, sometimes people do have a little bit of, you know, shame or stigma around sharing that. So, you know, the easier that you can make this conversation, the better. I know that in Marin, our team there, they actually have a bingo game that they play with folks when they're doing this presentation for people who are 60 plus or have disabilities. So instead of just kind of, you know, shouting out, hey, do you pay for incontinence supplies or whatever? Not that anybody ever would do that, but they do it as bingo and as a teaching moment. So the bingo board is actually, it has little symbols of the different things that are countable potentially as medical expenses. And then, you know, that's something that's on there. So it has a little image, I think, of adult diapers, and then like vitamins and other, you know, different things that folks don't necessarily think of when they think of medical expenses. So it's just an easy way kind of to have that conversation and to share that information. Also, something that we do is just we try and put together just a comprehensive list, you know, of things that we have tried and that have been successful. So again, if people are shy or you know, don't want to say it aloud, they could read it and, you know, kind of say, yes, I have this, and like, okay, great. Then let's find a receipt for that and turn that in.
Yeah. We also had a really good reminder from one of our peers who brought up the CAFB program, the Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants, and that it's a California program that provides cash assistance to low-income seniors and people with disability who are otherwise not eligible for federal SSI because of their immigration status. And so it's worth remembering that even if someone receives CAFB benefits, they can also qualify for CalFresh and Medi-Cal. So people who are over 60 or disabled and that are unable to get SSI, but are instead getting this cash assistance program for immigrants, they too could be eligible for CalFresh.
Great reminder.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Those are all the questions that we've received so far. Give people a few more seconds to type in any last minute questions. But otherwise, well, if we'll give people a few minutes. In the meantime, I want to thank Liliana for being here with us today and talking to us about the rules for people who are over 60 and or disabled. And I want to remind you all to join us next week. This is one of a series, and next week we're going to be diving into a different population. So looking at students specifically, and again, it's Thursdays at 10 a.m. And we're also recording and posting these for future view. It looks like there are no other questions coming in, so I'll go ahead and say thank you all so much for joining us. And Liliana, again, thank you so much for being here, and we'll hope that you can join us next week.
Thank you, everyone. Stay well. Bye.